Revealed, 10 spine-chilling encounters with cursed feral people hidden in Appalachian shadows. The cold air whispered secrets throughout the mountains of Hollow Ridge, where tales of cursed feral people echoed in the minds of its weary residents. Many laughed them off as drunken gossip, but for single mother Sarah, life was already a battle. As she worked the night shift at the diner, her 2 young children, Lucy and Jake, waited for her at home, innocent of the horrors lurking just beyond the tree-line. Faint flickering lights illuminated the diner, a beacon in the expansive darkness that surrounded them. But tonight, something felt different. Sarah locked the diner doors behind her. A chill crept into her bones as an uneasy silence fell upon the town. Glancing around, a prickling sensation crawled over her skin, as if unseen eyes were watching her every move. Then she saw them glowing eyes peering through the branches of the trees, unblinking and filled with an unsettling hunger. The breath hitched in her throat, sending her racing for home faster than she thought possible, heart pounding wildly against her chest. Days passed, and the town shuddered with stories. Children vanished from their beds, shrouded in whispers of a malevolent force. The fabric of Hollow Ridge tore further with each disappearance, leaving Sarah's heart heavy as Lucy and Jake began to experience nightmares of shadowy figures creeping into their dreams. She tried to calm them, her voice steady even as fear gnawed at her. "It's just stories, sweethearts," she'd lied. "Nothing to worry about." But even she struggled to believe her own words. She approached the local authorities, her earnest pleas fading into the void of their indifference. They dismissed her concerns as the ramblings of a tired mother, shaking their heads as she left the precinct, rage burning across her insides. Desperate, she turned to Mr. Garvin, a shadowy figure who wielded stories like weapons. The town's tales of feral people seemed to blossom anew in his presence, each eerily detailed account sending shivers of dread tumbling through her. "Those cursed souls," he sighed, eyes clouded with memory. "They were men and women once, betrayed by their own kin, their thirst for revenge echoing in these woods." Each word twisted her lower gut, luring her deeper into a history laced with betrayal and darkness, hinting at sins that bound her family's past to the very shadows she feared. The townsfolk were restless. The air thrummed with growing anxiety. As nights fell heavier, shadows grew bolder, trailing Sarah like vultures, circling her family. She felt their weight, a malicious energy breathing down her neck as she shuffled the kids between school and home. Serrated whispers festered in the corners of her mind. She could hear them murmuring her name. "Before we continue, I need to tell you something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to their system, and many people are missing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and select all notifications so you don't miss future videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue." The urgency rushed through her as she raced home one night, shadows closing in with every step. An unnameable dread engulfed her, and she could almost feel the ghostly fingers of the cursed people reaching, taunting her with dark promises. In the heart of Hollow Ridge's silence, she caught sight of the feral figures emerging from the trees, a tapestry of horror woven into the very fabric of her reality. Just before the darkness enveloped her, a piercing question clawed its way to the forefront of her mind. Could she truly shield her children from the monster she had always thought was mere folklore, or was it already too late? As Sarah burst through the door of her small house, panic erupted within her. She fumbled with the locks. Her hands trembled as shadows whispered just beyond the threshold. Heart racing, she glanced back over her shoulder, half expecting to see those predatory eyes lurking close behind. Shadows danced at the periphery of her vision, like phantoms pulling at the threads of her sanity. "Mommy!" Jake's tiny voice broke the suffocating silence, his face pale and streaked with fear. Lucy clung to his side, her wide eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Shoo!" Sarah urged, her voice barely a whisper. "It's okay. Just stay close." She felt like a moth trapped in a flickering flame, drawn to the dark weight of dread surrounding them. The house felt impossibly small, each creak of the floorboards loud and accusing. She quickly shut the curtains, blocking out the cold, unforgiving darkness beyond. With every inch of fabric she drew across the window, it felt like she was sealing them in a tomb. "Can't sleep. Things are in the trees," Lucy murmured, her voice tiny and trembling. A chill shot down Sarah's spine. The children's nightmares were spilling into their waking hours, bleeding together into a cacophony of terror. "They're just stories," she tried to convince herself, yet doubt etched its way into the deepest parts of her soul, punctuating her resolve with fear. Stories, tales of cursed beings lurking in the woods, waiting for nightfall to creep into helpless homes. As the night wore on, anxiety swelled like an approaching storm. She stayed awake, clutching the kitchen knife her grandmother had given her for protection, a talisman against the shadows encroaching on their lives. But deep inside, she questioned if it would be enough. The darkness in their home twisted into an ominous presence, as if it breathed, waiting for something. She turned the radio on low, prayers mingling with static, an attempt to drown out the lurking silence. But the crackling of the speaker seemed to amplify her fears, the dissonant noise a reminder of the tales Mr. Garvin had spun, each word resonating like an impending doom rolling in from the mountains. Suddenly, the distinct sound of scratching echoed from outside. It was subtle at first, barely a whisper against the wooden walls. Sarah held her breath, straining to hear, her heart pounding like a war drum. The kids clung to her, eyes wide, trashing her attempts at calm. "Mom," Jake gasped, pointing towards the door. The scratching grew louder, more insistent, fingernails scraping against the wood, a frantic plea for entry, or worse, a warning. "What is it? What is happening?" Lucy trembled, looking up at her mother as though she were an anchor in this tempest of fear. Sarah turned her back to the door and knelt down, grasping her children by their shoulders and locking eyes with them. "You both need to be quiet. No matter what happens, don't make a sound. Promise me." They nodded, wide-eyed and frightened, the gravity of her words settling heavily in the air. Then suddenly, the scratching stopped, replaced by a chilling stillness that wrapped around the house like a shroud. A breathless pause, pregnant with dread. What if they were already inside? Sarah glanced up at the windows, shadows shifting in the dim glow of the streetlight outside. Shapes moved on the treetops, a grotesque dance of limbs and potential violence. With a frantic squeeze of her children's hands, she opened the drawer and took out her grandmother's knife, steel glinting under the faint light, warm in her grasp, a desperate comfort. And then, just as the stillness began to fracture, a voice threaded through the darkness, low and guttural, a whisper entwined with the growls of starvation. "Let us in." Her blood ran cold. They were here. She barely caught her breath. Could she fight the nightmares after all, or would they consume her whole? The scuttling began again, louder now, resounding ominously against the door. What would crawl in through the cracks of her sanity? She lurched toward the darkness, ready to confront whatever. Horror awaited. The scratching returned, more frenzied this time, a mad symphony of claws raking against wood. Sarah's heart slammed against her ribcage, each thud echoing her growing dread. She caught a glimpse of Jake's terrified face, his small body trembling beside Lucy, who had pressed herself against the wall, eyes darting to every corner of the room. "Mommy, I'm scared," Jake whispered, voice shaking with a child's fear that ripped through Sarah's resolve. She felt the same fear gnawing at her own insides, clawing to escape from the pit of her stomach. "Me too, sweetheart," she whispered back, forcing a shaky smile, her grip tightening on the knife. The scratching stopped again, replaced with a sinister silence that made the air feel heavier. It enveloped them like thick fog, closing in, tightening around their throats. Then, the voice came again, this time harsher, more demanding. The words were a growl, twisted and hungry. "Let us in, join us." Ice coursed through Sarah's veins. A primal instinct clawed at her to flee, but where would they go? The house was a fortress only in her mind. It felt more like a trap now. Every shadow loomed larger. Every corner seemed to harbor hidden horrors. "I think it's the stories," Lucy muttered, her soft voice threaded with disbelief. Her innocence mixed with the knowledge of something much darker. "The ones about the things that come from the woods." Sarah swallowed hard, remembering tales spun in quiet voices around campfires, a dreadful legacy that made her skin crawl. Creatures that wore the skins of the vanished, seeking flesh, hungry for those who dared venture too close. They were supposed to be folklore, something that used to frighten children, but now they felt real and tangible. Jake's grip tightened around her wrist. Mom, what if they're real? Her mind raced. Could they really be outside, waiting? The stories painted a picture of twisted forms and coal-black eyes, of people transformed by the darkness that devoured their souls. Her own breath came in tight gasps as fear gripped her. Everything faded into a haunting silence, heavy and thick. She glanced back to the windows, paralyzing dread gripping her heart. And then she saw them. Shadows pooled against the glass, dark shapes moving, watching, waiting. Mom, they're out there. Jake squeaked, voice rising in panic. Shoo, Sarah hissed, eyes darting. But her mind frantic, every instinct screamed for action. She had to protect them. Fighting back the terror, she crept toward the window, knife clutched in her fist like a lifeline. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the back of the house, shaking the walls. It felt like the very foundation had trembled, shaken by the weight of something monstrous. The children stepped back, fear etched into their tiny faces. Sarah, what is happening? The voice of Mr. Garvin, their ever-watchful neighbor, cut through the chaos, desperate and frayed. He sounded close, but how? How could he not see what was truly at stake here? She hesitated for a second, torn. Should she shout for help? But if she did call out, would it draw the horrors closer? Mom, Lucy whispered urgently. Don't let them in. Don't open the door. Clenching her teeth, Sarah backed away from the window, retreating into the darkness of their home. Her throat was dry, choking on the weight of unspeakable choices. Each second ticked slowly, time stretching, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Then, as if in answer to her silent prayers, the scratching returned, more fervent than before, clattering against the walls and door, a maddened cacophony. Fingers clawed through the cracks, reaching, stretching toward them, desperate to breach their sanctuary. The presence grew stronger, a palpable force that swirled in the corners of the room, whispering sinister promises, tugging at her sanity. Fight or flight, Sarah thought, her breath hitching. What if this was the moment when everything changed? What if she had only one chance to protect them? The whispering shadows closed in, and Sarah knew tonight, her true battle had just begun, but would there be any survivors once dawn broke? The walls vibrated with the awful scratching. It was relentless, like 1,000 rakes dragging over the wood, threatening to splinter the very structure of their home. Sarah pressed her back against the wall, eyes flickering between the door and her children, who appeared dwarfed by the rising tide of terror. Stay behind me, she murmured, though the words felt hollow. The children obeyed, clinging to one another as their wide eyes reflected her fear. Shadows danced across their faces, flickering like the dying light from the lantern on the table, casting monstrous shapes that lunged and twisted. The door rattled violently. The hinges screamed under duress. It's just the wind, Sarah croaked, but the lie felt feeble in the face of what was happening. The wind couldn't sound like that. It couldn't scrape like nails across glass. Please let us in. The voice echoed again, now a rasping whisper that curdled her blood. Join us, don't let this be the end. She shook her head, as if denying the truth would make it vanish. Yet she could feel it burning in her skin, settling in the pit of her stomach. They were here. Whatever they were outside, and they wanted inside. Then there was a soft thud, a heartbeat of silence punctuated by the stillness that crept into the room. It was a sound that echoed even louder than the wailing. Lucy pointed at a small window high on the wall. Mom, look. Sarah's gaze snapped to the glass. At first, she saw only her own warped reflection staring back wide eyes, a mouth open in silent scream. But then, they emerged. Dark figures, their features hidden beneath dark hoods, rising like smoke. They floated just outside the frame, stretching fingers long and thin as if testing the air. Jake gasped, Mom. He stumbled back, pressing himself human barricade against Lucy. Shoo! Sarah breathed, her heart hammering. No sudden moves. The figures melted into the shadows, but Sarah knew they were still there, lurking. She grabbed the knife tighter, knuckles white with strain. What could she do? A chilling thought clawed at her mind. If they didn't let them in, wouldn't they just keep coming? Let them in, please. The voice twisted around her, a symphony of despair. You'll be safe. We've been waiting. She could feel a tingling sensation creeping along her arms, a whisper of their insidious promises weaving through her thoughts. What if this was some kind of urgent plea? Maybe they too were trapped in their own nightmare. Mom Lucy's voice barely rose above a whisper, drenched in fear and confusion. Sarah turned, seeing her daughter's wide eyes glistening in the light. They know about us. They want our souls. Suddenly, the door shuddered again, more forcefully now, as if it had taken on a life of its own. The wood splintered beneath relentless pressure. Join us, the voice urged, a siren call that made Sarah's skin crawl. Open the door. Against the cacophony of scratching, Sarah felt the pull of darkness, an aching desire to succumb. The pain of resistance was overwhelming. Could she save her children, even if it meant locking them into this nightmare? No, she screamed, her voice breaking against the impending dread that threatened to swallow them whole. With a quick glance at her children, she turned back to the door. Desperation surged within her. I want to give in. With a wild swing, she threw her weight against the door, bracing it with her body as the figures grew silent. Then, the unmistakable sound of something large scraping against metal erupted behind her. The front door. Hold on, she shouted, fear driving her actions as she backed away toward the window, the knife shining like a beacon of hope. But she could hear whispers rising again, louder, more articulate, clawing at her will as the door cracked open just a sliver. Then, just as suddenly, the front door swung wide, and the darkness flooded in. What would they see? What awaited them on the other side? A cold gust of air swept into the room, carrying the scent of decay and despair. It slithered around Sarah like a serpent, pushing past her mental barriers and wrapping around her throat. She gasped, recoiling as shadows coalesced into forms. They poured through the doorway, spilling into her home, their dark figures merging with the very essence of dread. Mom! Jake cried out. Sarah gripped the knife tighter, heart pounding one steady beat followed by a surge of adrenaline. She swung the blade toward the nearest advancing shadow, but it passed right through, as if made of smoke. Panic clawed at her chest. The intrusion was more than physical. It felt like cold fingers gripping her mind. Join us, they murmured, voices echoing, twisting in and out of her thoughts like a sinister lullaby. Embrace the end. The darkness will protect you. It's warm. Lucy pressed against her side, trembling. Mom, I don't want to go with them. They're not real. But with every whispered promise, the shadows seemed to loom larger, devouring the light, inching closer, convincing her with every whispered word. They had eyes, glinting with otherworldly hunger, and though she couldn't see their faces, she could feel their gaze piercing through her. They were not just spirits. They were predators, enticing with ancient charm and the promise of escape from a world that no longer cared. Beyond the figures, shadows danced wildly like a storm. The lanterns sputtered, flickering out, leaving them in absolute darkness. Sarah could feel the edges of reality blurring, the fabric of time stretching as agonizing whispers seeped deeper into her consciousness. Stay with us. No, she screamed, lunging at the encroaching darkness. She swung the knife wildly, eyes burning from strain. Get away from us. A chorus of laughter erupted, chilling her down to her bones. With wild desperation, Sarah backed towards the window, dragging her children with her. The cold glass felt impossibly distant. Could they escape? The figures shifted, freezing in place, almost waiting at the threshold. They were toying with her. Mommy Lucy whimpered, tears glistening in the dim light from the window. Each breath Sarah took became a train of panic spiraling into despair. Familiar melodies of childhood were now twisted echoes in her mind. Every moment felt stretched, time folding over itself as her thoughts raced. Join us, they continued, a hypnotic harmony, their words entwining in her thoughts. You can save them. You need only let go. Suddenly, a harsh crack rang through the air. Sarah turned, a flash of fear tightening her chest. The window. A shadowy hand had reached through, grasping at her, sliding toward her children. No. She lunged forward, yanking them away just in time. They stumbled back, clutching each other, their faces pale with terror. The shadows laughed again, the sound grating against her sanity. You cannot protect them forever. Leave us. Sarah shouted, instinctively shielding her children, stepping between them and the creeping dread that had overtaken their home. But they kept coming, a merciless tide, as Sarah felt a momentary pulse of clarity. Maybe if they could escape, maybe she could fight back. She turned, heart racing, and shoved herself toward the window, adrenaline coursing through every fiber of her being. "Climb," she shouted to the children, darting closer to the opening. "We can fit. Hurry." Just as she wedged her frame against the cool glass, a guttural roar erupted from the shadows. They surged forward, and in that split second, Sarah felt a powerful force pull at her, something dark and insatiable. "Join us," it sang from their lips, a refined agony that spiked her terror. Clenching her jaw, she could barely think as the shadows brushed against her, wrapping around her ankles like chains. What lay outside, waiting beyond the broken window? As she clutched her children tightly, the world spun into a whirlpool of despair, and she knew whatever came next wouldn't be easy. There was no going back. The last tremors of sanity slipped away as she looked deep into the shadows. Desperation clawing at her voice. "I want to be yours." The figures paused, the darkness waiting, and the air thickened with something more than dread, something far more sinister. What could she sacrifice to keep them safe? Would she become something else entirely? With a primal roar, the shadows lunged forward, a suffocating wave threatening to swallow Sarah and her children. Time twisted. It felt like an eternity as she fought against the darkness, dragging Jake and Lucy toward the fragile escape they envisioned. "Mommy, please," Jake cried, panic lacing his voice. Sarah felt his small fingers shake against her arm. She looked down at his wide eyes, reflecting terror and confusion, and for a moment, there was a flicker of hope, a fleeting dream of safety just beyond that window. "Hold on to me," she barked, her own scream drowned out by the cacophony of shadowy laughter that curled around them. The abyss reached for her like a lover in the night, promising sweet oblivion, but this was no embrace. She squinted into the choking dark, desperate to find the light beyond the glass, but only seeing her reflection broken and haunted. "Now," she shouted, propelling her children toward the window. She shoved them forward, clawing at her own skin as the shadows tightened their grip. A window, a way out. They surged towards the jagged opening, but Lucy hesitated, her feet rooted in place. "I don't want to leave you." Her voice trembled as she turned to face the shadows, uncertainty clouding her gaze. "Run," Sarah yelled, her heart fracturing. "Go." "Mom, no." Jake screamed, tearing himself away from Lucy's side, but a shadow darted forward, spindly fingers snaking around his ankle, dragging him back into the dark. "Jake!" Sarah lunged, but a rush of freezing air slammed into her, sending her sprawling. She landed hard on the floorboards, the knife slipping from her grip. Shadows danced around her, mocking her with their sinister giggles. "Embrace the void," they hissed, their voices now a hypnotic chant, promising safety, shelter, home. A life without fear. Just let go. "Get your hands off him," Sarah roared with a fierce maternal urgency. She rolled to her feet just in time to see Jake clawing at the shadow, panic in his wide eyes. "Help me." He was overwhelmed. The dark tendrils tightened, pulling him toward an endless night. Everything shifted within Sarah. Survival instincts boiled to the surface. She summoned every ounce of strength, clawing her way to Jake, but the darkness filled the room, swirling like a tempest. With a wild scream, she leaped, throwing her entire weight on Jake's arm, wrenching him away from the shadow's grasp. In that moment, clarity broke through the chaos. She could feel the shards of her sanity snapping. This wasn't just about escaping. It was a battle for their souls. "Lucy, the window," she barked, her own voice breaking. Every second dragged like lead. "Get out. Now." Her daughter hesitated again, fear gripping her small face. But there was no more time. The shadows were consolidating, merging into a thick wall, snarling like hungry beasts. Without a second thought, Lucy bolted, scrambling towards the broken glass. It had to work. It had to be real. As the darkness lunged again, Sarah pushed it aside, feeling the cold whispering of their promises gnawing at her mind. She wouldn't lose them. Not today. Not ever. In a flash, the toys strewn across the floor caught her eye. Old and familiar, they represented innocence, something these shadows sought to obliterate. Grabbing a rusting toy truck, she hurled it at the wall of shadows. It struck them with a crack, a momentary flicker of light shattering the dark. "Now, Jake, go," she yelled, and he raced toward Lucy. The darkness recoiled as it let out a guttural shriek, a sound so oddly human that it chilled Sarah. Heart racing, she stumbled back as she shoved the fragile remnants of her bravery in front of her, expecting for the shadows to freeze. Instead, they twisted, furious, their whispers growing louder. "You can't run forever, you will join us," they howled, the promise dripping with malice. Sarah felt the air shift as more shadows piled into the room, compressing the space, suffocating them. She had to act. "Follow me." They pushed toward the window in one frantic rush, the shadows swirling around them, relentless as they closed in. The moment Lucy and Jake crawled through, Sarah felt the weights of her children slip away, but her own body was caught in the throes of darkness. In that terrifying instant, she caught a glimpse of something beyond the shadows. A flickering light glimmered from distant stars outside a realm of light. "Mom," Jake called, reaching out, desperation etched on his small face. "I'm coming," she shouted, wrestling against the grasp of the shadows that twisted and pulled. They were dragging her back, and a chilling understanding coursed through her. This wasn't merely about escape. It was about sacrifice. What threads of her soul would she have to sever to save them? As she wrenched her body closer to the window, the weight of the shadows was crushing. Their whispering promises swirled around her, intent on ensnaring her in an eternal embrace. Each heartbeat drummed a truth she didn't want to face. Could she become something entirely different to protect her children? The answer hovered like a specter in the room. Time was up. The moment she felt her foot leave the ground, the shadows recoiled, howling with rage. She flung herself through the window, the cool air slapping against her face with a mocking clarity. But was it too late? In the split second between freedom and the desperate pull of darkness, the last flicker of light threatened to dim on the other side. What would she sacrifice to keep her children safe? The shadows continued their relentless wail behind her, and outside was an expanse of unknown terror. The choice loomed ahead. Would she transform into that which she fought? Sarah's determination silently teetered on the edge, and with it whispered the chilling realization: the shadows wouldn't let go easily. In the void of that moment, danger danced around them, and their fate hung quaking in the balance. Would they ever see the dawn again? The impact of Sarah's leap shattered the fragile barrier between light and dark. She tumbled out of the window, ice-cold air engulfing her as she hit the ground, rolling away from the jagged glass. Dizziness swirled in her head. The relentless shrieks of the shadows faded, but their presence lingered like a cloying fog. "Mom! Mom!" Jake's voice rang through the dim twilight, filled with raw urgency. Her heart swelled at the sound, pushing her to her feet despite the weariness clawing at her limbs. She scanned the surrounding area, a vast, empty field extended before them, the last flickers of daylight deepening into an unsettling twilight. "Lucy! Jake!" she shouted, still catching her breath. They were running towards her, silhouettes rushing out of those wretched shadows. Relief washed over her, but it was tempered by the gnawing dread that pulsed through her. "Mom, are we safe?" Lucy's small face was streaked with fear and dirt, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "For now," Sarah breathed, her voice cracking. "But we need to keep moving." As they started to run, the ground felt unnaturally cold beneath Sarah's feet, almost as if the soil itself was trying to pull her back into the earth. She stole a glance behind them, hesitant to confirm what she feared. To her dread, a thin, misty veil loomed at the edge of the forest bordering the field, a pulsing, shifting mass of shadows. It was following them. "Go," she urged, her instincts flaring. Together, they raced across the field, desperation fueling every step. But as they pushed towards the line of trees, a sudden thought gripped her. What if they were not free? What if the shadows followed them like a persistent nightmare? Branches reached out like skeletal hands, clawing at her as they entered the dark forest. The trees stood like sentinels, ancient twisted forms looming overhead, their leaves whispering secrets in the breeze. A chill wind grazed the back of her neck. It reminded her of the shadows, that lethal caress hungry for her children's souls. "Mom, I'm scared," Lucy murmured just above a whisper, clinging tightly to Sarah's hand. "Just stick close," Sarah urged, quickening her pace. The shadows had been a horror beyond belief, But the forest had its own sinister feel. Shadows flickered between the trees, making her question if the nightmare was truly behind them, or if it had transformed into something worse. As they pressed deeper, the twilight thickened into a palpable darkness. Sarah's heart raced with fear and uncertainty. Each crackle of twigs beneath their feet sounded magnified in the suffocating silence. Then, a low growl echoed through the trees. Heavy, menacing. It sent her heart into her throat, and she froze for a moment, urging her children to silence. Was it them? Were they being hunted? Keep moving, she ordered, forcing her legs to move as panic threatened to freeze her. But as they went deeper into the woods, flashes of pale figures danced in her peripheral vision. Something was there, watching them. Mom. Jake's voice was strained, high-pitched with fear. There are faces in the trees. Sarah's stomach twisted as she turned to look. Eyes, hollow and glowing, peered back at her from within the bark. They couldn't be real. Run, she screamed, her instincts flaring. The faces twisted into expressions of rage as she urged her children, heel to toe, deeper into the woods. Caught between the malevolent shadows outside and whatever cursed spirit haunted the trees, a sense of despair churned in Sarah's gut. Could they find safety amidst this nightmare? Her mind raced with thoughts of survival, yet terror flooded in. Cackling echoed, mingling with the growls, and it felt as though the very forest conspired against them. Every step felt heavier, and the shadows felt close again, threatening trails of darkness that intertwined with the trees. Then came the worst realization. They weren't alone. Branches shook overhead, a darker shape moving swiftly among the trees. With a jolt, Sarah turned and faced the shimmer of eyes that seemed to deepen into a void. She felt its gaze, piercing into her very soul in that moment. She faced a terrifying question. What awaited her in the darkness? Were they truly free, or just stepping deeper into another darkness? As they ran, the shadows' whispers began to echo in her mind, twisted promises vowing to take what was left of her family. Were they being lured deeper into despair? And then she heard a voice whispering, wakefully familiar yet tainted with malice. Stay with us. What lay ahead was as terrifying as the dark from which they had fled. Would they escape this new nightmare? Or would the shadows catch up with them once more? Branches snapped overhead like bones, a violent cacophony cutting through the suffocating air. Sarah's heart thundered in her chest as she urged her kids forward, the forest closing in around them. It felt alive, each rustle and whisper taunting them with secrets she dared not comprehend. Faster, she gasped, the words clawing their way out of her throat. Lucy's grip tightened on her hand, the child's knuckles white from fear. Jake lagged behind, eyes darting wildly as if every twisted root and shadow bore teeth. Then, the growling came again, deep and primal, echoing between the gnarled trees. It felt close, too close. The hairs on Sarah's neck stood on end as she fought the urge to turn around. There was no room for doubt. They had to outrun whatever lurked behind them. Then silence, that a heavy stillness enveloped the forest, smothering them. It was worse than the growls, the resonance of something waiting. Sweat trickled down her back, and she dared not breathe. Mom. Jake whimpered, his voice barely a whisper. Shoo, Sarah hissed, straining to hear. The low hum of the forest had faded, replaced by a gnawing absence that twisted her stomach. In that moment, she felt nothing but the steady rhythm of their breaths and the chilling sensation that they were being watched. That a sound broke the silence, a soft, fluttering rustle. Sarah's heart jolted, and she spun around, searching frantically. The darkness revealed nothing but shadows shifting ominously, yet the sense of being observed intensified, crawling under her skin. Keep moving, she urged again, her voice a shaky command she barely recognized. They stepped deeper into the embrace of the trees, each footfall muffled under the thick carpet of leaves. Suddenly, a figure darted between the trees, a flash of white that eclipsed the darkness for just a heartbeat. Sarah stumbled, slamming into Jake, who stumbled backward. Did you see that? He cried, his voice cracking. What? Sarah hissed, glancing over her shoulder. A cold knot twisted in her gut as she realized they were not alone. In the corners of her vision, wisps of movement flitted beyond her sight, fleeting figures that melted into the trunks of the trees. Then there were the whispers, surrounding her like a sorcerous fog. Stay with us, they teased, slithering into her thoughts, grasping at her sanity. What was happening? Run! Sarah shouted, panic rising as icy fingers of dread curled around her spine. The forest trembled with chaos, twisted limbs reaching out, begging her to stay, to succumb to the terror they so eagerly provided. The shadows morphed into creatures, grotesque forms that glided just out of sight. They could feel the pulsing energy of the chase, the thrill of the hunt. Sarah pressed onward, her knees threatening to buckle, breath hitching in her throat. "Where are we going?" Lucy cried, her voice tinged with confusion and fear. "Anywhere but here," Sarah gasped, her body a tempest of fight and flight. And then, the ground opened up beneath them, tripping over roots. They spilled into a clearing. The moonlight poured through like a blessing, illuminating the scene before them, stark and eerie. Lying before them were remnants of a fire, dull embers glowing as if recent. Shadows danced upon the faint flames, elongating in the soft light. Lying next to it were ragged remnants of clothing, faded, worn, but too familiar. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, horror dawning within. "What is it?" Jake asked, stepping closer. Before she could answer, a piercing, hollow laugh rang through the clearing. It echoed off the trees, chilling her to the core. They weren't alone. They never had been. The figures from the trees, pale and gaunt, emerged from the shadows surrounding them, draped in tatters that trailed like mists. Fear cascaded through Sarah. They might have escaped from one nightmare, but this was a new hell. "Stay with us," they cooed, their voices slipping into a hypnotic rhythm. The children trembled, grasping for their mother's hand. In that suffocating moment, Sarah faced an unthinkable reality. Could they fight against the shadows that had already claimed others before? As the figures moved closer, stretching their arms like vines hungry for souls, Sarah realized the truth. The darkness was not merely something they fled. It was a force that beckoned them with sinister promises. Taking a deep breath, Sarah steadied herself. Before her stood a choice: fight or surrender. But as the figures reached for her children, one question burned brighter than the rest. How could she protect her family when the very woods conspired against them? The chill of despair gripped her, as the realization sunk in this fight was just beginning. What would be left of them when the shadows took what they came for? The air thickened, buzzing with a deadly silence as the figures closed in, their gaunt faces twisted with a hungry anticipation. In their hollow eyes, Sarah saw remnants of despair, pleading yet maleficent. They wanted something from her, and as the realization sat heavy in her chest, she felt her grip on her children loosen just as they were about to be swept away. "No," Sarah shouted, her voice breaking through the suffocating atmosphere. With a surge of primal energy, she yanked Lucy and Jake back against her, shielding them as best she could. The shadows hesitated for a heartbeat, curious, recoiling slightly from her fierce maternal instinct. Mom Jake's voice trembled as he squeezed her hand tighter. "Hold on to me," she hissed, eyes darting between the advancing figures and the safety of the trees beyond the clearing. An escape was still possible if they could just make it past the gathering crowd. They might plunge back into the labyrinth of the woods and lose themselves among the shadows. Before she could act, a chilling wind erupted around them, swirling leaves and debris like a tornado. The whispers grew louder, almost a song now, seductive and menacing. "Stay with us." The way they enunciated the words sent shivers darting down her spine. Sarah felt her resolve teeter. Each heartbeat was a countdown to inevitable surrender. She couldn't let them win. Not today. The fire pit, with its supple glow, flickered like a taunting eye. Shadows flickered in chaotic patterns that mirrored her spiraling thoughts. She needed to think, to fight back. "Look!" Lucy exclaimed, her voice cutting through the noise. She pointed toward something just beyond the figures, a faint outline of a structure, sagging and warped, swallowed by creeping vines. A place, perhaps, where they could hide, maneuver, and plan their next move. "Get to that building," Sarah ordered, her voice steadying. "On my count: 1, 2, 3. The curse of the dark figures accelerated as they lunged forward, but Sarah surged ahead, clutching her children. They darted past the remnants of the fire, the echo of mocking laughter chasing them, pressing against their backs with every step as they neared the twisted building. An unnatural stillness engulfed them once more. The familiar hum of fear settled back in her throat, leaving the air heavy and stale. The door, warped and half-hinged, loomed ominously. Would it be a sanctuary or trap? "Mom, are we safe?" Jake whispered, glancing back at the gathering shadows. "Just a little farther," she whispered back, determination washing over her as they shoved through the door. It creaked loudly, protesting their entry, but opened just wide enough for them to squeeze inside. Darkness enveloped them completely. A suffocating quiet filled the space, and the air was thick with dust and fear. The walls bore strange markings, ancient scratches as if the very wood housed phantoms of despair. Her heart raced as she fumbled for her phone, praying for even a sliver of light in this engulfing darkness. But as the screen flickered to life, illuminating their faces in a pale glow, a soft rustling emanated from the far corner. Something was inside, lurking, waiting. "Mom." Lucy's voice shook, barely above a whisper. Sarah urged, fear curling in her stomach again as those eyes, unblinking and feral, appeared from the shadows. There was no question now, they weren't alone, and as the figure stepped into the muted light, the horror of its visage became all too clear. It bore an unhinged smile, sharp teeth glinting within the murk, silhouetted by the trembling light of her phone. "Stay with us," it crooned, echoing the chant of the shadows outside. Panic surged like wildfire. Sarah's only thought was escape. But hindsight told her one concrete truth. They had crossed a line into something far darker than she had ever imagined. What would it take to sever the bonds of whatever cursed them? And as the figure moved closer, she realized their fight was no longer against the forest, but against the very force that had been haunting her family for generations. Could she figure out a way through? Or had they finally stumbled into the heart of darkness they were never meant to see? The air crackled with tension as Sarah stared into the feral face before her, a grotesque caricature birthed from the darkest shadows of the forest. Its grin was unsettlingly wide, revealing sharp teeth glistening under her phone's meager light. The whispers grew fainter outside, drowned by the drum of fear hammering in Sarah's chest. This close, the figure emitted an aura of both desperation and malevolence, a tether of anguish that wound its way through the very marrow of the room. "Stay with us," it crooned again, voice like nails on a chalkboard, pulsing with an ancient hunger. "Mom," Lucy exclaimed, clutching her brother's hand tightly. "What is that?" "Don't move," Sarah whispered fiercely, pressing her back against the wall, her pulse quickening. She felt the blade of the knife slide reassuringly against her leg, but doubt gnawed at her resolve. How could one weapon stop a creature like this? The figure lunged suddenly, darting forward with a predatory grace. Panic ignited within her. "Run," she shouted, grabbing her children's hands and yanking them towards the back of the building, which felt like it was closing in around her. The shape darted in their direction, shadows swirling, but she needed space. It was only by the will to protect her children that she found the strength. They erupted through a doorway, pushing into a narrow corridor shrouded in darkness, the air thick with the scent of moss and decay. Dust motes floated before the light of her phone, and the walls seemed to pulse with an unholy heartbeat. They scrambled forward, desperation fueling their flight. "Mom, what is happening?" Jake whimpered, his small voice drenching the air, soaked with fear. "I don't know. Just stay close." She urged them on, her heart racing as the creature's eerie laughter echoed behind them. Weaving through the darkness like a venomous thread, in the faint glow, she spotted a stairwell leading upwards, a series of warped steps veiled by crumbling boards. "There!" she shouted, pulling them up as they hurried toward salvation. Every creak beneath their feet sent jolts of terror through her bones, fearing the shadows would follow, would reach them before the light could. They climbed higher. The laughter receded, but dread hung heavy, thickening the air. At the top, they found themselves in a small room, boarded windows barely allowing the twilight to seep through. The walls were adorned with faded paintings, dismal landscapes of the same twisted woods below. One struck Sarah with painful familiarity, a scene depicting a family standing together, faces etched in joy and sorrow. "Mom, I'm scared," whispered Lucy, her eyes wide and glimmering with unshed tears. "I know, sweetheart." Drawing her children close, she felt the warmth of their small bodies against her. "We're going to make it. I promise." But as she surveyed the room, a sense of impending doom wrapped around them. The shadows danced angrily at the windows, the creature's soft murmurs just beyond the door. Survival didn't feel right. It felt like they were sealed in a tomb awaiting the final toll. Then, Sarah closed her eyes, a deep terror unfurling in her chest alongside a surge of understanding. The cursed figures, they weren't always monsters. They were once people, betrayed like the family in the painting. Maybe the thought flickered in her mind like a candle flame. "Stay here," she said softly, holding Jake and Lucy close. "Whatever happens, do not leave this room." "No, Mom, don't go," Jake cried, eyes brimming as he clung tightly. "I have to. We need to break this curse." She felt the shadows clawing at her sanity, but an ancient pull, the same calling that had brought her here, demanded she confront the darkness. With her heart hammering and trembling hands, she edged towards the door, gripping the knife like a lifeline. She felt the shadows press against her skin, whispers echoing in fear and rage. "Join us," they urged, painting her every thought with thicker despair. Yet, she stood firm. With a deep breath, Sarah swung the door open, facing the figure illuminated by the dim light from the adjoining room. "What do you want?" she demanded, infusing her voice with the strength of a mother's love. The creature paused, its hollow eyes narrowing. "You carry the blood, it binds you to us," it rasped, body twisting as it stepped closer. "Join us. Become part of the shadows, free from the pain." "Join you?" she said incredulously. "You live in torment. This isn't freedom. It is salvation," it replied, tone swirling like a haunting melody. The shadows around it flickered, whispering promises of peace, of unity. But Sarah's heart surged with clarity. "You were once human. You once felt love. I won't let that go." She gripped the knife tighter, driven by raw emotion, and stepped forward. "If you want to feed on our pain, you won't have me or my children." A thunderous growl erupted, and the shadows surged forward, ready to engulf her. Sarah swung with all her might, aiming not to destroy but to sever the tether of darkness holding them. The blade scraped through the shifting forms, and they shrieked, voices merging into a cacophony of despair. And then within that chaos, she felt a flicker of warmth, of hope. A light pulsed to life around them, bright, blinding, pushing back against the relentless dark. "Mom!" Jake shouted. "What is happening?" "Hold on," Sarah yelled, feeling the light grow. Clenching her eyes shut against its brightness, she shouted to the darkness, "I refuse to abandon you. You can be free too. Let us go." In that moment, the entities froze, shadows faltering as if her words toggled some ancient mechanism. The glow enveloped them, rippling through the air and crashing into the shadows bent on containing them. "Release us," Sarah bellowed, her voice bursting like a dam ready to break. Then, a rumble rolled through the forest, and the figures began to dissolve, tendrils of darkness spiraling into wisps of smoke as the light ignited everything around them. She shielded her eyes as blinding radiance swept through, wrapping her family in its grasp. And just like that, the shadows eased away, retreating into nothingness. "Is it over?" Lucy's voice trembled, and Sarah turned to see her children beside her, the light surrounding them like a protective cocoon. "It's over," she whispered, tears streaming as she pulled her kids close. "We did it." In the distance, the trees seemed to shift, breathing once more under the weight of mourning. The dawn light shimmered through the gnarled branches of the now vibrant forest. They stepped out, blinking against the brightness that a new day greeted them, a promise of hope glimmering on the horizon. And as they took their first steps toward freedom, Sarah knew that while the past couldn't be changed, the future was theirs to shape. "Let us go home," she said, letting relief surge through her as they walked, hand in hand, leaving the shadows behind. If you enjoyed this conclusion, you need to subscribe right now. This is the moment to show your support. Don't miss our next exclusive stories. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm and help spread the word. I want to hear from you, so flood the comments section with your reactions and theories about the ending. And please, instantly share this video with at least 5 friends who need to experience this conclusion. Don't wait even one more second. Only true fans understand how important it is to support the channel through these actions.